Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Last episode we talked about the Ravens, and this episode we're going to be talking about the Spirit Wolves. So the Spirit Wolves are an interesting addition to the summon tree that has been changed recently. And what they did to the summoned Spirit Wolves is they allowed the Spirit Wolves to dish out cold damage instead of physical damage. Now those of you who may have done some research into this summoning tree before are probably aware of the fact that the summoned Spirit Wolves were never the best in terms of damage. Basically, you have three different summons here. You've got the summoned Spirit Wolves, which allow you to summon 5 wolves, and those 5 wolves can dish out a nice amount of damage. The 5 wolves are going to each hit individually and of course can spread their damage out very poorly in certain situations. Like for instance, if you have 5 monsters, your 5 wolves could be attacking 5 different monsters and you would have a pretty poor spread. Now, if you add up all their damage and you multiply it out, it does actually come up to some pretty nice numbers. And as you can see here, I have a level 39 Spirit Wolf, and if we take our calculator, we can look at the level 39 Spirit Wolf and see that it's 883 to 903. So 883 plus 903 divided by 2 gives us an average damage of 893, multiplied by 5 wolves gives us a total of 4,465 cold damage per rotation. Now, unfortunately, because they are cold damage, that means that when you come across monsters that are cold immune, they're going to do nothing. However, having them be cold damage was a good change in my opinion because the rest of the tree is physical. So when you look at the dire wolf is physical damage. When you look at the bear is physical damage. When you look at the raven is also physical damage. So having a damage type other than physical in the tree was a very good move on their part, and it doesn't really nerf anything because the summoned Spirit Wolves were never the highest damage wolves in the group, and you'll find that out when we go over the next video, which is the dire wolves. Now, this particular wolf is kind of based around defense. If you notice, each individual wolf has his own speciality. So the wolf, the summoned Spirit Wolf, has a very high amount of one particular type of element. If you go to the others, you'll see that when we beef up the summoned Spirit Wolf, we get attack rating per level and defense per level. And then you look at the summoned Grizzly, and again, attack rating per level and defense per level. So the summoned Spirit Wolves are more about attack rating and defense, whereas the summoned Dire Wolves are more about life per level. And the Grizzly is more about damage, because if you look at each one of these, you'll see the Summoned Grizzly increases the damage per level. So the synergies on Summoned Spirit Wolf are Summoned Dire Wolf gains life per level, and Summoned Grizzly gains damage per level, which is definitely very nice. Which means that by themselves, the Summoned Spirit Wolves aren't really the greatest in terms of damage. Now, as a defensive screen, the Spirit Wolves are definitely the superior choice in my opinion, because they have obviously more defense and more life generally than a lot of the other monsters. In terms of the number, so when you have a certain number of wolves, you can definitely dish out more damage, I think, in general, or distract the enemy more so than you can normally. And what you'll notice is that the wolves can kind of spread out, and they can be a much more effective damage screen to you to help keep you alive. And it's just mainly because there's just so many of them. Whereas if you cast the dire wolves, there's only 3 of them, and the bear is only 1. But the beautiful thing about the new 2.4 patch is that, of course, we can have all of them together now. So we've got all the summons at the same time. This means that we get the beauty of the damage from the bear, the extra damage from the dire wolves, the nice physical damage of the ravens, and the cold damage to balance everything out of the summoned Spirit Wolves. In my opinion, the summoned Spirit Wolves are probably one of the lowest HP and defense ones, specifically just because in general, if you look at the HP pools of each one, you'll see that the individual wolves have 1,397. The dire wolves have 2,397, and the bear has a massive 6,987. So, you know, each one tends to be different, but there are different uses for the Spirit Wolves than just simply having them as damage and that is to use them as a defense screen, as I'm talking about earlier. So, for instance, let's say you were a Hurricane Druid, or let's say you were a Werewolf Druid, or a Bear Druid, or a Fire Druid. You could essentially have 5 of these, 5 wolves. Just put just enough points in, or 1 point with plus the skill, so you have 5 wolves, cast them, and they can be effective damage screens to help you against certain things. Now, I don't particularly like to use them that way, but I have seen some people use them for that purpose relatively easily. There's really not a lot to talk about with the Summon Spirit Wolves. I mean, one of the things that I think we do need to go over is the fact that they are cold damage now, means that they are not going to get benefits from things like Amplify Damage and Decrepify like the other wolves will. So if you use Decrepify or Amplify Damage or stuff like that, you're going to get a nice damage bonus with all the physical. But unfortunately, the Summon Spirit Wolf doesn't have that bonus now. He would, however, get bonuses from things like Lower Resist and Conviction. Those would help him out immensely because the Conviction and the Lower Resist would help bring down the cold resistance of the monster, which would increase the damage of the Summoned Spirit Wolves. So perhaps if you were really having some trouble with physical immunes, you could maybe keep a weapon on your offhand, like a Lower Resist wand, or maybe even one of the new Plague Swords for a lower resistance proc, and that way you could beef up the damage of your Summoned Spirit Wolves versus those immunes. I do think it's important to point out the fact that they have relatively no damage unsynergized. So if I were to beef up the Summoned Spirit Wolves to its maximum with no synergies, you notice they only do about 135 to 139 damage. It's not until you start beefing up the Grizzly, which is the main one, by the way, that increases their damage, not the Direwolf, that they start to get a huge damage bonus. The Direwolves are the life per level. So if we skip over the Direwolf and we only put points into Grizzly, you notice the damage is still fairly nice. It's really a matter of the specific synergy that you want to beef them up the specific way that you want. Because even with no points in Direwolf, we're still looking at max damage on the Summoned Spirit Wolves. And we can do the same thing, of course, with the Direwolves if we were to only put points into the Direwolves. The bear is where that damage is coming from. So the bear is what's going to increase the damage on the Direwolves, not the Spirit Wolves. The Spirit Wolves are only going to increase the Direwolves' attack rating and defense per level, which is interesting to consider, because if you're looking at the Druid and you're trying to figure out where to shave points, this is an interesting thing about these particular abilities, is that each one of these has certain synergies. For instance, the Summoned Spirit Wolf has no synergies from the Raven, despite the fact that the Raven has synergies with the Summoned Spirit Wolf, which means that if you were to cut out the Raven, your Summoned Spirit Wolves would generally not be harmed by that. So for instance, if I didn't put any points into the Raven whatsoever, you'll notice that the damage on the Summoned Spirit Wolves is relatively unchanged. Still 883 to 903 with no points into the Raven. Now, I'm not really 100% sure why you would put no points into the Raven with this particular build. Maybe you're trying to skimp on points. It is a lot of points. I mean, you're talking about 20, 40, 60, 80 points to invest fully into the Zoo Druid tree. And this is a little bit of a detriment when you're thinking about how you want to make this build work. You know, do you specifically want the damage from the Grizzly? Or are you specifically just looking for tanks? Because if you're looking for tanks, then the Dire Wolf with his HP buff is probably more important. The defense on the Summoned Spirit Wolves is interesting, and you could potentially just simply build up the Summoned Spirit Wolf and the Summoned Dire Wolf as tanks and utilize the 5, 6, 7, 8 wolves as tanks that way. All of it is very interesting to consider, and I think most people who are going to build a full Zoo Druid are probably going to go with the full tree. But do keep in mind that that's a lot of points, and you really don't have a lot to spend anywhere else for anything else. And you are relatively stuck with the physical cold damage build, which means that you're going to have to find some other way to add in maybe a third element to try and balance things out. You could, for instance, maybe try and go for rabies. You could maybe, for instance, try and go with maybe hurricane or something. I'm not exactly sure what you would build, but something else like a bear or a werewolf to add into the mix could certainly be interesting. You could also just simply go full summon and maybe build up a poison creeper or a carrion vine, put max points into Oak Sage or Heart of the Wolverine to beef up their damage and attack rating, or maybe go completely into Spirit of the Barbs and try and build this tree differently. I really don't think there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to Summon Spirit Wolves. I think that's pretty much going to be the end of the video. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching, and keep watching.